recording, and I'm going to welcome our speaker today, who is our colleague, Dr. David McMenemy, also an affiliate of the Strathclyde Centre for Internet Law and Policy, and senior lecturer in the Department of Computer and Information Sciences in the University of Strathclyde. He's a great collaborator of ours, very interdisciplinary in his approach, and today he's going to be talking about some of his recent research, which has been funded by a new UKRI, Arts and Humanities Research Council grant on privacy exclusion and information behaviour in public library services, digital services, during COVID-19. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to David, who will give the presentation.
Thanks very much, Angela. I'll just share my screen, just get ready to go. Excellent. And I'll move. If I move to the right, I look to the right occasion, I've moved all of you guys to my second screen, so it's not me being rude, just so you know. So thank you. I'm delighted to see also that Elaine Robinson, Dr. Elaine Robinson's here today as well. So Elaine is a research associate on the project. So Elaine, I'm sure, will keep me right and chip in at key points during the presentation. Elaine and I've worked together for a few years on research related to this. Her PhD examined internet acceptable use policies in libraries. So she's got really kind of good background, and and she's worked at Stirling on kind of digital citizenship type stuff as well. So so yeah, Elaine, you can keep me right and chip in when I need it. So yeah, thank you all for coming along today. Appreciate it. So what I'm going to do is talk about the project, obviously, for most of the session, but also, given this is a non-information science audience predominantly, I also want to talk about the research context as well. I think that's quite important because the first thought might be, if you're outside of that group, why does this matter specifically to libraries? And we very much see it as, this particular topic is a microcosm of what's happened in wider society. So libraries are just a really good kind of petri dish for exploring it. So I say the project's called, the project is examining, as Angela said, exploring the kind of how public library digital services and the compelled use of them during COVID has impacted on issues like privacy, user behaviour, and also things like digital equity, the kind of assumption maybe that we all have the technology to access these services. So we're exploring all of those kind of key themes. So just talk about the context firstly. So slide working, there we go. So I'm going to talk about the context firstly, as I said, so issues around privacy and equity. Then we'll present some preliminary findings. We've just focused on some Scottish data for you. The study looks at the entire UK, but the data we've pulled is just related to Scottish public libraries, just for simplicity. And then we'll give an overview of the research that's still to be done over the summer in terms of what's left to do. So in terms of the context, just kind of put this in the context where we can see it fitting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about privacy, ethical values, and library information services. This project's really at the heart of that. So a couple of slides on library values, but Michael Gorman's kind of one of the main people in library values. His book, Our Enduring Values, has been published in 2 formats, but he has 8, what he calls 8 values of librarianship. And the 3 that really pertain specifically to what we're doing are intellectual freedom, equity of access, and privacy. You could also include things like literacy and learning in there, and democracy in terms of information access, but really the 3 can mainly fit what we're doing on those 3. So this book and Michael Gorman's work is very important to the library sector and librarians. They take Gorman's values very seriously. But also the chartered body in the UK, the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, state that access to information should not be restricted on any grounds except that of the law. And they also support the Council of Europe's statement, which says public access points should respect the privacy of users and treat knowledge of what they have accessed or wish to access as confidential. So that kind of value in librarianship is pretty much sacrosanct. There was a famous Japanese author about 5 years ago, I think it was, that had his school library borrowing records accessed because people were interested in what he was reading, and librarianship generally was aghast at that, because what people read in terms of how they develop as human beings is actually it's a really private thing, or should be a private thing, and delving into that can be really problematic. So I guess really what I want to highlight in this point though is that during COVID, the public access point became private. The public access point for library services became the private space. So personal computers, tablets, smartphones, these were the devices that people were actually accessing public library services on. So that raises significant issues of ethical issues for libraries, and librarians generally. Obviously, the first one being privacy. Crucial elements of privacy are obviously in most professional spaces, most professions, consider both of these important. But informational privacy, information about citizens, how it's shared, how it should be protected, what rights citizens have. But perhaps more importantly for librarianship and librarians is privacy and access. What rights citizens should have when accessing knowledge, what limits should be placed on such access. So we very much see our project fitting within that kind of disciplinary space alongside the other issues of equity of access and information behaviour. So it's really important. Now, this is not a new issue for libraries. As I said, Elaine's research has touched on this before, and pretty much my research for the past 20 years has been touching on some of these issues. But, in terms of privacy and library services, what are some of the key issues? Well, commitment to patient privacy is potentially challenged by some of the activities that we actually have previously undertaken pre-COVID. So use of third parties and service delivery is not a new thing. And it's something that, as I say, I've written about and Elaine's kind of covered as well over the years. I guess COVID has just brought it to a head in terms of there wasn't a choice. So, if you're using third parties and service delivery, which is convenient, so I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, it's a convenient thing to do. But the key thing for library services, if they're adhering to their ethical values, is are they clear about who, why, and what will be done with user data when they bring a third party in? So that's really important, and that kind of fits into the digital citizenship narrative about educating people about their rights, etc. So really fundamental to this is that professions need to be mindful of the differences between informed consent, obviously, which is essential under GDPR, and the engineering of consent. Now, by that I mean, if your only means of accessing a public library service is via a third-party app, you really don't have any choice. So you could argue, well, it's still informed consent because someone can say no to the service, but if it's the only means of accessing it, you really are compelled to do it if you want to become a library member. So, these aren't trivial issues. These are issues that need deep ethical discussion for libraries and librarians and the services that we provide. Just another example from my own experience, I've used this slide a few times, but I think it really highlights a key fundamental point. And now this was a data protection statement that was sent to members of a UK public library service around 5 years ago. And really what the basis of this was that the library service in question was using all of the library management system data, which is essentially the database of users and their behaviour, to the cloud via their system provider. And to do so, obviously, they were doing the right thing by actually having a new data protection statement that had to be agreed to. But you'll see if you read it, I mean, it's very straightforward, but it's a blanket third-party exemption statement. So they're saying, no, you trust us to, hire third parties to deliver aspects of service, and pretty much that's it. Now it seems, largely uncontroversial, but really the next slide really raises what the important issues are. Not agreeing to that statement meant that you were no longer a library member. Firstly, now that's majorly problematic because public libraries are actually a legal right in the UK. You have a legal right under various acts of parliament in the UK to a public library service. So for that to be the basis of membership is extremely problematic. And also, as I said a second ago, blanket third-party data protection exemptions are problematic because why should the public have to trust libraries that they won't use third parties they wouldn't approve of? And it might be the case now that they wouldn't, but who's to know in 5-10 years time, especially after Brexit, who knows where our data protection laws are going to be in 10 years time. So, there is that kind of, if it's okay now, doesn't necessarily mean it's okay in 5 years time. And what's really important is there's a handful of very large companies building up significant behavioural databases. There's really, it really is I'm not understating, it's a handful of companies delivering these services. So in the UK, it's something like 5 or 6, I think, Elaine, if that's correct. Roughly 5 or 6 companies delivering ebook services. So I guess I would argue that such changes to this kind of practice play on a trusted societal role. And we need to put much more thought into how we do this as professions, because just because it's convenient for our service delivery doesn't necessarily mean we're actually looking after the interests of our users. And I think that latter part should be what's fundamental. And say more globally, cloud storage of patron data risks building databases of immense value on patron preferences and behaviour. You can imagine there are something like 32 public library services in Scotland. So when I was in practice 20 years ago, every library had their own database of library users, and we had the behavioural data. Now, if you have a handful of companies, you have a handful of companies that are building up behavioural data of millions and millions of people. So, that's extremely problematic. I also heard anecdotally from a colleague who works in the digital space that, these companies have been approached by other companies for access to their databases. Match.com approached one of them and asked for kind of their borrowing data because it was valuable to them. They were told to go away, but who's to say that'll be the case in 10 years' time, that the same standards are there? So this is all about the creeping nature of what we do with data. And so I really can't overestimate the point that library borrowing data until relatively recently was extremely private and limited to the service you borrowed from. Now you have large companies that are global in nature that have borrowing data and behavioural reading data for millions and millions of people. And that's even if we trust the companies, that's problematic, I think. So as I said on the previous slide, there are only a handful of companies providing these services to libraries, and I had a quick look at the data this morning, and our data highlights that over half of UK public libraries use the same company. I won't name them because that'll come out later. But so that's a lot of people, and it's a lot of borrowing data, and it's a lot of behavioural data. Now, nothing's being done with that data at the moment, but who knows what may happen in the future. So there is this danger of ceding professional ethical values to third parties to administer. And that's not something professions should really do. So that these are all hypotheticals in terms of what might happen, but it's a problem that we need to be aware of. So just to summarise the context before I move on to the project, the COVID lockdowns have obviously exacerbated ethical issues related to the reliance on third-party digital services, but also the practices and behaviours that have built up in their use. As I said earlier, these are not new things. These services have been around for a long time, but COVID has brought it to a head once you don't have a choice. So the compelled use of digital, as I said earlier, also transcends libraries. It's not just library digital services. We're talking about uses of things like Zoom, MS Teams, some of the stuff Angela does, contact tracing apps, etc. These are all linked issues. What we're doing essentially with their project is taking a specific example and examining it in terms of libraries. But this is a universal problem now, that our over-reliance on third parties to deliver services that were previously public. So it's an immense problem for us to address. So last summer we made a bid under the UKRI's COVID Rapid Response Programme, and we made the bid under the call, the theme of the call, which was the digital turn in cultural consumption opportunities and limitations. And we were delighted to be funded for it. And we started basically just before Christmas, and we'll finish in February 2022. So in terms of what we're investigating, really overarching thing is that what are the effects of the digital turn for public library services and users in terms of using digital services? So to that end, we're looking at three distinct categories. So we're looking at organisational sectoral issues, which will hopefully help inform the profession. We're looking at ethical issues as well, and also user information behaviour issues. So three distinct kind of themes that we're looking at. In more detail, what that means, privacy and ethical issues in the utilisation of digital in the spaces that were previously overtly analogue in nature, linked issues of digital exclusion and ensuring equity of access, and also how information behaviours have adapted and or been impacted across age groups and other societal demographics. So in terms of the data we're gathering, the first stage was to use freedom of information requests of all UK public library authorities. So what we're keen on asking them was, how have libraries responded to COVID enforced lockdown? And how has usage of traditional and digital services been transformed as a result of that? Elaine's also conducted the readability testing of third-party privacy policies in terms of how understandable they are, which I've got a slide I'll show you in a few seconds. And Elaine and Ian, Ian's Professor Ian Ruffin is leading on the information behaviour aspects of Elaine. So they've started the focus groups. I think this week was the first one. So these will be conducted over the summer. And what we're interested in here is, how have user behaviours changed in lockdown, and what are the consequences of that for digital exclusion? And the last thing we'll do while we're working on the data analysis is we have money in the bid to actually do a UK survey. So we're going to hire a survey company to do a survey across the UK in terms of how physical and digital services are perceived by the general public, and how they interact with them, and how much they understand in terms of things like privacy, etc. So that should be quite exciting, doing a national survey of that type. So just to kind of give you an overview of the research questions, firstly, to what extent has the usage of digital services in public libraries across the UK increased as a result of COVID? How do the public libraries mitigate any digital exclusion issues? What are the experiences of users in utilising these services from both behavioural and digital exclusion perspectives? What information on privacy issues is presented by public libraries to users related to the use of third-party services? How accessible, understandable are the privacy policies of third-party vendors? And also, how aware of the privacy issues related to the use of third-party services in libraries are library users? So kind of broad range of questions there that we will be answering over the course of the research. So in terms of third-party vendors, and again, this is not unique to libraries, this is a universal thing, but the move to digital resources during COVID obviously meant the need to download third-party apps and subscribe to third-party services. So we're interested in how our concepts of information sharing convey to the patron. Are patrons in public libraries fully aware of how e-services engage with patron information and privacy? And I've got some kind of comments from the FOI requests that might kind of give some information on that later. As the first thing that Elaine did though, when she started, was to do a readability test. Now Elaine's now, well, can I call you an expert, Elaine, in readability? But you've done readability tests on acceptable use policies as well, and developed a model policy as a result of that. Now, readability testing is actually extremely useful if you want to see just how high-level documents that are made for a general audience are pitched. So we performed a readability test on third-party privacy policies. And now readability is defined as how easily a piece of writing can be read and understood. So it has its critics, but it's a good kind of rough and quick measure of seeing how difficult a document is to read. And we certainly believe it's an important concept, especially for public libraries. Now, the key thing to remember for public libraries is they serve everyone. So everyone, regardless of age, background, income, is a public library user. So, you know, like many public services, unlike private, they are unique in that aspect that they actually cater for everyone and are legally obliged to cater for everyone. So we have used readability testing in Elaine's previous work, as I've cited there, and I'll cite in the next page. So just to give you an idea of what the outputs were, Elaine put them through a range of tests. I'm just going to put a few up there. So in terms of the ideal score for live reading age, you're looking at 60 to 70, and the average score for the third-party vendors was 44. Smog, Coleman, Lau, and Gunning Flog all use a similar measure, which is the reading age in the States. So a score of 14 basically equates to a reading age of it's 20, 21, Elaine, if I recall, is that correct? It's a kind of grade age. And Coleman Lau 12, which is a grade age of basically 18, grade level age. Gunning Flog 13, grade level age of obviously 19. So these are all kind of post-high school predominantly ages. Now the ideal score is on the right-hand side, and what you should be pitching for excuse me, for Smog is a 10, Coleman Lau 7 or 8, and Gunning Flog 7 or 8, but you should certainly be below a 13, 14 or 12 for those. So, I mean, arguably they're not doing too badly when you compare them to the findings that Elaine had in her PhD in public library internet acceptable use policies, where only 5.5% met the recommended readability standards, and 8% of the acceptable use policies in libraries were as difficult to read as a scientific paper. So, there's definitely a sense that the third-party vendors are trying to kind of make their policies readable, but for a general audience, they're really still not there. So you have the issue there of users downloading apps and having to sign up to policies that a fair chunk of them probably don't understand. And, again, that's problematic. And that should be something I think that any service that hires a third party should try and make sure that they're as readable as possible. So Elaine's been busy over the past 6 months or so, kind of sending out and receiving FOI requests. So we sent FOI requests out to all of the public library services across the UK, which is roughly 214, and in Scotland there are 32. So just to give you an overview of the Scottish replies, we have 29 replied within the kind of statutory 20 working days, which we thought was pretty good in the middle of COVID. So we were quite pleased with that. One replied day 21, one replied day 32, Is that other one still outstanding, Elise, or I can't recall if the other one's still outstanding now?
No, it's in now.
Is that in now? So we've got all 32 in now, which is great. Now, the key thing that we've highlighted on the kind of left-hand side of the slide there is 14 library authorities in Scotland now are run by charitable trusts. And there's a significant number in England and Wales that are also run by charitable trusts. Now, fortunately, in Scotland, the FOI legislation was extended, which meant that if any kind of services, like cultural leisure services, were run by charitable trusts, then they came under FOI legislation as well. But there is a concern that the more, essentially they're called ALIOs, which is arm's length external organisations, the more services that are farmed out to these kind of organisations, there is a concern that transparency becomes an issue. So, fortunately in Scotland, they have all replied because they're compelled to by law. But in England and Wales, they aren't compelled to by the FOI law that's across the UK. So there is a concern there about transparency. So in terms of what we were asking for, please provide data on active membership of the library service for each year. Please provide annual usage statistics for each year. And the data for these, we were looking to kind of see trends essentially to kind of see how things had improved. We're also looking at physical loans because as much as we are interested in digital services, we're also interested in how they've coped with still managing traditional services as well. Please provide costings for the amounts paid annually for the providers of the digital services. And again, the data for this is quite interesting, which I'll show you in a second. Please provide any information on any support services offered by your service to help library users access these services and the costings for these. What advice is given to library users regarding privacy and use of digital services provided by third parties, and details regarding how the various lockdowns related to COVID have impacted library opening hours. So that latter one is not really digital specific, but we were interested in seeing the kind of differences in how library authorities approach COVID and how they manage the process. So just some initial findings. Since COVID, active membership decreased on average 56%, which is not really a surprise. Physical loans decreased 78%. And they had been decreasing pre-COVID by around 11%, but obviously 70% over 1 year is massive. In terms of e-lending though, which you'd expect again, e-loan figures have climbed steadily. So ebook usage increased during COVID on average by 100%, e-audiobooks on average by 76%, so quite significant uptake of those services. The corresponding data related to costings. So what we were interested in here was how much more they were paying for digital services now in this COVID year than they were previously. And there was a huge variance here. So the average increase was 72%, but the highest increase was 277%. So individual contracts seem to kind of look different for libraries for the same companies, which is, I guess, kind of worrying. For example, Public Library Authority 1 went from £12,000 to £38,000, whereas another authority went from 14,800 to just 15,750. Now, there's differences here, and that wasn't corresponding to the difference in usage. So there's something kind of going on here, I think, in terms of the deals that some libraries have versus the deals that others have. So that's definitely something I think we want to delve into further. Quite worrying though, out of the 32 libraries in Scotland, 3 respondents said it was commercially sensitive, which is rather worrying for transparency. The contracts that you sign with these kind of companies, I think, should be made available. And so it's not as if the companies are different. Essentially, it's the same companies we're talking about. So we're not. This isn't about one company want to hide their data. The rest of them were more than happy to provide it. And now for this audience, obviously issues of privacy are important, and initial findings read privacy advice offered to patrons. Most references to privacy relate to privacy policies. So there's not really any guidance given by libraries. Pretty much what they are is pointed to privacy policies. And given privacy policies are largely written to be complex to understand, there's an issue there. So 17 of the public libraries in Scotland had reference to external privacy policies, 16 to internal privacy policies. One library service stated it wasn't applicable since they didn't offer any advice unless it was specifically asked for. And only one library service mentioned training for staff to help users, which I think is kind of worrying. So just a couple of examples from the data. One example says customers read and accept privacy notice and terms and conditions on the individual third-party service applications. So pretty much they're pointed to the third party and they're assumed to have read it. That's pretty much the guidance. Another example, library users are advised to read the terms and conditions of service access and use detailed by each provider, as well as to ensure that their preferences are selected and saved within their account and reviewed regularly. Again, all of that's been passed on to the user without any guidance. So, in terms of initial kind of feelings on that, third-party vendors tend to authenticate by patron ID, which is good, rather than personal information, and they have no access to the personal information held by library services. So, point one, good. But point two, just to quote here directly from one of the main vendors, you might supply us with such information as your name, address, and phone numbers, content of reviews and emails to us, and personal description photographing your profile. You can choose not to provide certain information, but then many of our service features will not be available to you. So there is a sense that once the library service passes into the third-party vendor, the library kind of withdraws its kind of responsibility for what the person does on a third-party vendor. Now, that might be okay on a basic sense, but given you can see the kind of nature of the other information that the third-party vendors can gather on people, I think there's an issue there about user behaviour. So, in a sense, I think we feel there's a need for advice and assistance in navigating third-party services. I mean, that seems to be self-evident. A lot of the heavy lifting has been placed on the shoulders of users and re-agreeing to third-party services, which, again, legalistically is okay. But, if you're a profession that's kind of really about trying to advise people how to navigate the world in terms of information access, I think we could do better there. Better patron education and privacy rights and protection of personal information seems to me to be a key goal. Now, I guess we need to explore how that might happen. And a coordinated approach to advice on use of services might be useful going forward. There's movements by the British Library in the UK to have one digital presence for all public libraries in the UK, which is extremely promising. But I think alongside that should be these kind of agreements. So one agreement for everyone to use. And I say that's essentially what Elaine did for her PhD, that one of the main outputs was a single acceptable use policy for public libraries. It would be good to see that kind of single use policy approach also compelled on the third party, but done from the point of view of written from library values. I think at the moment, a lot's ceded to them, and it's like, we buy something off the shelf, here you go, you deliver it, and we can forget about it. It's not really adhering to the principles of librarianship, I think, and so I think we could do better there. So just bring it to an end, so we get some questions in. But next stage is really focus groups with library users taking place over the summer. So Elaine and Ian have been doing that, starting that this week. Obviously, we're going to release the FOI data and write papers based on analysis of that data. The nationwide survey of the UK population will come in the autumn. We're really excited about that. And some of the theoretical approaches we're going to be using in analysing the data. We're looking at theories of digital equity, information behaviour, and specifically in the bid, I'm going to be kind of applying this in-bounds framework of contextual integrity because that's a good fit for public libraries in terms of what people expect versus what they get. So it's a nice fit theoretically for that. So thank you for your attention. Sorry, it's quite longer than I thought I would speak for. Questions welcome, and the website for the project is there, our email addresses, and also the Twitter handle, because you can't not have a Twitter handle nowadays. So yeah, thank you everyone for paying attention. I will stop sharing the screen now. Good to see you.